agreeing to sit and listen to me talk about things that in some instances, I'm just learning about with the help of Joseph, and prior to Joseph, with the help of Dr. Kennedy. So I struggled a little bit with the title of the presentation. I started out with unlocking the value of Jamaican, and to me, I thought value had such a subjective connotation to it. But then I heard our first presenter speak to the value of language, and I thought, you know, if we were in church, we'd be talking about the power of the Holy Spirit, right? Because we are connected. But I want to talk to you today about how to use emerging and existing technology to unlock the latent power of Jamaican. Now, the power of a language, and of course this is from the lens of somebody who has not studied linguistics formally, so please forgive me if I don't get this absolutely right, or if I reopen cans of worms that were retired many years ago. But to me, the power of language confers its ability on speakers to actively participate in society. Now, it's not easily defined, and as I said, it depends on the lens from which you view it. But if you think about it from my perspective, for the purposes of this discussion, we'll define language power as the ability that it gives to speakers to participate fully in society and societal acts. Now, language power goes far beyond communication, because it encompasses areas such as identity and culture, cognitive development, economic opportunities, social inclusion, and global understanding. So the power of language, the power of the language that you speak, impacts your own sense of power. And we've heard earlier that people who are monolingual Jamaican speakers are by implication seen as lower status. And that's a problem that we would need to address. Kyle Chang says that languages gain power if they are used by the powerful groups, whether that's measured in an economic sense, a political sense, or in a military sense. So unlocking a language's inherent power leads to the empowerment of its speakers. Traditionally, only the powerful were allowed to unlock a language's power. Minority languages do not have the same prestige, and most often the speakers of these minority languages have very few resources directed to them in their native language. And it was pointed out earlier that even in our context, we kind of do it halfway, right? So I specifically enjoyed hearing about the example of under the law, because I often listen to that, and I recognize the duality, right? So they will have a scenario played out in Jamaican, and then the explanation is in English. So you are then locking people out of understanding the consequences of the actions that you are presenting to them as being sometimes negative. So my proposal, though, is that technology has created a mechanism by which we can unlock the power of language, even a minority language. So it gives us the capacity to circumvent the usual processes, whereas Dr. Lewis pointed out, we would need to see some amount of formalization of the language, some amount of standardization of the language, and the powerful groups would then have to confer power on Jamaican. But that power is latent, that power exists, as was first said by our first presenter. And what we want to do is to use technology to be able to unlock that, and to give power to those who may feel powerless because of the language that they speak. So speech and language technology, what is this about? Speech and language technology allows computers to interact with speech or text. So it's essentially an array of approaches that are underpinned by artificial intelligence. These approaches allow for a computer or a device to analyze speech, to produce speech, to modify speech, or to respond to spoken or written language. Speech and language technologies include such things as automatic speech recognition, machine translation, text-to-speech synthesis, dialogue systems. Joseph mentioned earlier ChatGPT. the most famous dialogue system that exists for the next few hours, right? We don't know what's coming down the road very shortly, right? Sentiment analysis is another tool that can be used, can be developed using speech and language technologies and language generation. And there are myriad applications of this. Applications in healthcare, applications in education, creation of virtual assistants, and many, many, many more. Now, speech and language technologies can confer power on a language. And this is because speech and language technologies do not make a subjective distinction between majority and minority languages. They are simply bits of text that you can use to train a computer to do what you want that computer to do. So in the speech and language technology domain, minority languages, or as Joseph correctly identified them, low-resource languages, are distinguished simply because of their lack of compiled linguistic resources and economic resources and human resources. These are things which are needed to train SLTs, but often they're not available for minority languages. And so Joshi and his colleagues found that by that measure, 88% of the world's languages are low-resource languages. And the implication of that is that speakers of 88% of the world's languages are in some way rendered powerless because of the language that they speak. But SLTs can circumvent the process of making a language powerful. SLTs include techniques for developing systems that can use the low resources that are available for these low resource languages. So this opens up opens up the possibility rather, for monolingual speakers of minority languages to enjoy benefits that have previously been denied them. Not having to wait for standardization, not having to wait for acknowledgement of the power of their language. We can circumvent the process. We can use technology to extract and expose that power and give power to the powerless. I think I want to speak about 3 of the priority areas that I have identified where speech and language technologies can be used to unlock the power of Jamaican. And I've labeled these the 3 E's of language power. And this is education, equity, and engagement. And I'll speak about each of them. I'll talk about some of the work that we've been doing in education. I'll talk about some of the work that we hope to be doing in the justice system. And then we'll talk more broadly about engagement and the techniques that have been applied elsewhere, which could easily be applied in our context. Unlocking the power for education using SLTs. When I read the Patterson report, or the Education Transformation Commission report, I was perplexed, I was appalled, I was frightened, to be very honest with you, because it speaks to the fact that we are losing generations and we're comfortable with it. There isn't a huge effort. There's a huge outcry, yes, for a while, and then the news cycle moves on, and we too move on. The efforts that are made by the ministries of education, those engaged in education more broadly, are not enough to tackle the problems that face us in our education sector. And it's my proposition that we can use speech and language technologies to help us to address these issues. How do we do that? The Carolit Group is a group of hard-working UE researchers and associates from around the world who are interested in developing instructional technologies. And we have been working with the Universal Service Fund. They have funded a project called Jumpstart, where we have been working to develop a literacy tutor, an automated literacy tutor. One which would allow students to work on their own, with the help of parents, guardians, or with teachers, but to have some autonomy in the learning of literacy. We're focusing on Caribbean students. And I say Caribbean because it's a regional project. We started out looking at Jamaica, but we've moved on to be now looking at Trinidad and Tobago, and in the future we will expand our reach even further into the Caribbean. This idea of the autonomy of a student, it takes into account a number of things. It takes into account the student's background. It takes into account the student's aptitude, the student's interests. It takes into account what we want the learner to achieve and the rate at which that learner can actively achieve that. It takes into account the fact that in a classroom with 35, 40 children, it's very difficult for a teacher to reach a student who is not keeping up. And many of our students, as the Patterson report told us, are not keeping up. And there are very few strategies that have actively been put in place or that even can be put in place to address such a wide-scale problem. Because what we tend to do is to throw human resources at the problem. The ministry has tried its best. It has deployed 90, I think, literacy specialists to address the problem, going into schools, helping teachers with new techniques of how to address literacy issues among children who are not thriving in the space. But that's 90 teachers, 90 specialists for all the primary schools in Jamaica. They cannot deploy enough human beings to address the problem. We have to address this through technology. And so the diagram here is a bit dense, but what I want you to focus on is the area circled in red, which is the student model. And what the student model does is that it allows for us to model Jamaican-influenced pronunciation of English. Because ultimately, what will be taught in a class on literacy is English. We will become literate in English. But as first language Jamaican speakers, going into a class and being told that, okay, you now need to learn English, without having been schooled, so to speak, in English in the first instance, they struggle. And when they pronounce a word that is not doesn't have quite the pronunciation that it should because of the influence of Jamaican on their speech, they're told, well, that's wrong. So they don't know that their pronunciation is not necessarily wrong, but it is simply not English. And if you say to a child, that pronunciation is fine when you're speaking Jamaican, but this is how we do it when we're speaking English, that child can better appreciate what you want them to achieve, and they can then, the learning outcomes will be increased dramatically. And so the Jumpstart project, and later on the Bright Start project, which is running in Trinidad, looks at modeling the pronunciation of Creole-influenced English. It incorporates mispronunciations, and it automates feedback. So the common, I'll call them mistakes with the understanding that they're not mistakes, but the common mistakes that a monolingual Jamaican speaker will make when trying to pronounce something or to read something or to say something in English they are incorporated in the design of this using speech and language technologies. And so the software can actually recognize that the child is influenced by Jamaican and can then have the appropriate feedback mechanism employed. And it does not vilify a child for being a monolingual Jamaican speaker. It does not say that what you're doing is incorrect. What you're doing does not have a place here. But what it does is that it benefits from that. Understanding where the child is coming from is the key to taking them to where you want them to go. And so this tool that we're developing allows for us to engage children and learners in this way. The other aspect I wanted to talk about was unlocking justice. A few years ago, 2011 is when it came to prominence, there was an article in the Jamaica Observer speaking about a man who was applying for asylum in the United States. And he was locked in the justice system. And the overseas press picked this up. The Observer and the Gleaner had articles about it, but only after it was highlighted in the United States press. This man was in Pennsylvania. And the headline highlights his stutter. It speaks to the stutter that he has. But what it does not speak to, and this is buried deep in the article, is that this man was a monolingual Jamaican speaker. The judge in his case, the judges in the many cases, in the many appearances that he had in court, said that he could not actively participate in the trials that he was engaged in. He couldn't participate in his defense. And so they didn't think that he was being given a fair deal. But the remedy to that is to keep him in jail because he's applying for asylum and he cannot be let loose on the street. They tried many things. They got official translators. This is in Pennsylvania, so maybe not a huge Jamaican population, but they tried translators. The translator had said, well, you know, we speak Jamaican, but his stutter really makes it difficult for us to translate effectively. They went so far as to take prisoners who were also Jamaican to translate for him, but then the judge didn't actually trust what they said. Right? The question came, did he really say that? And so that was a challenge for him. It's amusing, but it points to a real problem, because this man languished, and I wasn't able to find any updated information about him, but he languished in the system for years, simply because he was monolingual Jamaican. The stutter may have complicated it, but the main fact is he spoke only Jamaican. And so this was a big case that made the news in the US. It made the case, made the news here in Jamaica. But every day we see these things happening in the courts. It was mentioned earlier in the trial with the gangs the other day that people want to be engaged in Jamaican, even in the criminal justice system. The Chief Justice actually spoke about this some years ago and called for technology to be developed to assist with having people participate actively in their defense. And so speech and language technology can help with this. Speech and language technology can allow us to use automatic speech recognition to recognize the utterances of monolingual Jamaican speakers. Machine translation can translate English into Jamaican. And for those Jamaicans who do not read well or do not read at all, speech synthesis can actually read the transcript in Jamaican for them so that they can understand what is happening around them, and they can then share, participate actively in their defense, and maybe get a fair shake at justice. That's the power of speech and language technology to unlock justice. Then there is the idea of engagement. I told you that we are in the spirit, because almost everything that was mentioned earlier is coming back, but now we're looking at it through a different lens, through the not waiting for things to change, but actively changing things using technology. Many monolingual speakers don't have access to valuable information. Farmers, for instance, struggle to find information about the latest techniques and treatments for diseases. Users of the internet struggle to understand what's on government websites. The ads that come across on the radio that are in English. People struggle to benefit from the really important information that is put out there. But because they don't speak English, they do not get the value from this. Shout out to Broadcast Jamaican for actually producing the news in Jamaican, so that we need to spread this information far and wide, not just among bilingual speakers, but among speakers, monolingual speakers of Jamaican, so they know that there's a source where they can get some of the information from them. So what we can do with speech and language technologies is to use techniques such as information retrieval or text summarization. These can allow us to have people access information in the language that they prefer. And that will open up the world for many of our monolingual Jamaican speakers. Now, there are some pitfalls. And there are things that we need to be aware of as we embark on this journey. So before we build any type of system for, excuse me, any kind of SLT for a low resource language, we have to understand that there is significant sociolinguistic inquiry that needs to be made. We have to understand the dynamics of the language and the practice and usage of the language before we decide that we're going to use technology to engage people in this language. Secondly, because we can do something from a technical standpoint, engineering it so that it works and we can get good accuracies, numbers that say that, okay, we're doing this 95% correct, we're getting this correct 98% of the time, that doesn't mean that there is utility in what is being produced. And so we have to be aware of that. And I had an example of this where we used ChatGPT to have a conversation in Jamaican. So I started out, and you cannot see this. Let me try to shift out of this presentation and go to ChatGPT. And try to make this larger. Is that large enough? Can you read it? Apologies. So I start out by typing in what I think is Cassidy, and I don't get it right all the time. I said, say something in a patois. ChatGPT replies, "What go on, brethren? You know, where you depend?" I respond, "Me there party, what go on?" ChatGPT says, "Not much, you know, just the usual. How you stay?" Me give thanks. "How do you them?" was my response to ChatGPT. ChatGPT says, "Them good man. Them their school are learn the things them to make them future bright. What about you? What the plan for the rest of the day?" This is ChatGPT. This is a large language model, an artificial intelligence dialogue system that has recently been deployed and is improving every day, I might add. So ChatGPT asks me, what the plan for the rest of the day? And I say, boy, you want to say me a plan for going to Senti and go eat a steam snapper. No, I was trying to be clever, all right? I wanted to see just how well this thing had been trained and how much context it would have gleaned from all the text that it was trained on, because all they essentially did was hoover up all the text, as much text as they could find on the internet, and feed it into this computer, and it then is able to generate responses. So ChatGPT goes, "Oh yeah, man, a good vibes that. Enjoy yourself and make sure you take some nice pictures to remember the moment." I thought that was a bit vague. So I pressed. Right? I asked it, "When last you got Senti?" And it prevaricated. All right? So it now realized, okay, I am at the limit of what I can do here. Oh, so the response says, as an AI language model, I don't have a physical presence, so I can't actually visit places like humans do. However, I have access to vast amounts of information about many different places, including Senti. Is there anything specific you want to know about it? Challenge. Challenge thrown out, right? So I ask, where the capital name? ChatGPT says, "I'm not sure which specific location you're referring to as Senti, as there are many places with similar names around the world. Can you provide more information about the location you're asking about?" So I recognized that, and I tried to push. So I then asked, "Then you know, say a yard me I chat to you from?" Yeah. Right. ChatGPT says, "Yes, I understand now. Senti is a Jamaican patois term for Centro, which is a neighborhood in Spanish Town, Jamaica. Spanish Town is located in the parish of St. Catherine, and it was the former capital of Jamaica." So the response was not subjectively correct, but it recognized what yard meant, which I thought was very impressive. Right? So I understood. But then yard can be somewhat what's the word I'm looking for? It can be confused because I could be in my own home, or I could be talking about Jamaica itself. And the fact that it recognized that I wasn't referring to my being at home is what was impressive to me. But I take your point. It does. Yes. Which is the point I'm trying to make with this, right? So I then pushed and said, "No man, I'm a Spain me a chat about. Sentinel in a Spain." And it responds, "I apologize for the confusion earlier. I'm not familiar with any other place called Senti apart from Centro in Spain. So it's possible that it may be a local or informal name for a specific location. Can you provide more context or information about where Senti is located?" I'm not sure, but the fact that I don't think it's so, because Senti isn't necessary, it may not be, I can't say this for sure, may not be something that's written down a lot. It is. For Senti. I'm not sure why it wasn't able to get this, right? So I then asked it, "Oh, you tap chat patois?" Because I recognized that the language had changed. But its response was not back to me in patois. It persisted in English. And it said, "As an AI language model, I've been trained on large data sets of text from various sources, including Jamaican patois. This allows me to generate responses in patois as well as many other languages. However, please note that my proficiency in patois may not be perfect, and I may make mistakes or produce unnatural phrasing from time to time." I decided to have some fun with it, right? To ask it why to speak, he spoke with me. And it persisted in English. But my point is this. This is an engineering marvel. It's objectively accurate due to certain measures that are used in speech and language technologies to measure accuracy. Because it understood, it gave a response. When it came to the limit of its knowledge due to lack of context, it said so. And it allowed me to then make a decision about what to do. But it's not necessarily as useful as it could be, because it did not give me the information that I needed. Correct. Absolutely. Exactly. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And this is a part of what I want to get to in the last couple of slides. Go ahead. Absolutely. So your interactions make it better. So you are essentially training ChatGPT for OpenAI every time you use it, and you assert that something is correct or something is wrong, then it actually continues to develop its capacity using that information.
So did you tell him that sentence is correct?
I didn't. I was a little bit mean. I was pressed for time, so I didn't continue the conversation. But it highlights both the value and the potential pitfall that that exists with using these tools, which is what I really wanted to highlight here. And also, we need to understand that all languages, Jamaican included, are dynamic. And so we cannot train a system and leave it there. We have to continually improve on it, otherwise the tool will become obsolete. So, my final thoughts here. Speech and language technologies can help us to unlock the significant latent power in Jamaican. We don't have to wait for standardization. We don't have to wait for the powerful to make Jamaican powerful. We can do it using the technology. We need to continue to increase the volume of linguistic resources. We need a lot more translations into Jamaican. We need a lot more written Jamaican. We need a lot more recorded spoken Jamaican in order to build more tools that can help with this process. And we have to continue to increase the capacity in speech and language technologies. I'm doing my part. Our research group is doing its part. And we're working with the Jamaica Language Unit to make that a collaborative, cross-disciplinary approach. We know that we don't have the answers, all the answers as technologists, and so we're reaching out to those people who do have some of the answers that we need. And this is a call for additional collaboration and support as we move forward, because we're not simply talking about this and leaving it for others to do. We're actively engaged in doing it and making it reality. So thank you all for your attention.
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Coy. Could we give all our